Okay, let's dive in. $1 million dinner at Mar-a-Lago. That immediately grabs your attention,
It
right?
certainly does. Big numbers.
And word is NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang was there recently. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. Not long after that dinner, we start hearing about a possible shift.
A shift in policy, yeah,
Yeah,
regarding chip exports.
exactly. How the U.S. government is approaching chip export restrictions, specifically for NVIDIA, potentially easing up.
Which is interesting because, the feeling in Washington on both sides has been pretty strong about tightening the reins, right?
Definitely. Really clamping down on sending advanced tech, especially these super powerful NVIDIA chips, over to China.
And the potential easing seems focused on one chip in particular.
The H20, that's the one making headlines.
Okay, the H20. And just so folks understand why this matters, context is key here. This isn't just any chip.
Not at all.
This is the exact chip DeepMind used,
Mm-hmm.
for training their big AI models, the R1 and V3.
Wow, okay. So we're talking serious computing power, the kind that fuels, cutting-edge AI development.
Precisely. High performance stuff.
So the big question for us today, the mission for this deep dive is, why? Why this potential change now? What's behind this apparent shift?
Yeah, what's driving it? What does it actually mean for NVIDIA, for the tech landscape?
Hmm.
Are there, other factors at play we're not seeing on the surface?
Let's try and unpack that. Looking back, the previous stance was pretty firm, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Broad agreement in government, stricter controls needed for these advanced chips going to China.
The main worry being national security, technology edge.
Understandably, yes. It's about keeping sensitive tech out of the hands of, potential adversaries. These export controls are tools for that, really.
And now suddenly the story might be changing, at least for this H20 chip. Reports are suggesting NVIDIA might get to keep exporting it to China.
Might be the operative word. But NVIDIA themselves, they're not exactly, shouting from the rooftops about it.
No, their official line is quite measured. They've said publicly they don't actually expect a huge jump in China sales because of this.
And critically, they still anticipate not being able to sell their absolute top-tier next-gen stuff there. Chips like Blackwell, Vera Rubin, those are likely still off the table long-term for China.
Right. It's like, okay, you can keep selling last year's flagship phone, but not the brand new one that just launched?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a benefit for NVIDIA, let's be clear. Continuing H20 sales means ongoing revenue from a big market, at least for a while.
A silver lining, maybe? Short to medium-term cash flow.
For sure. But it's also clear that China isn't getting access to the very bleeding edge of NVIDIA's tech through this specific allowance.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. And there's still this big, question mark hanging over it all, isn't there?
Absolutely. How long does this easier approach last? What happens with future chips beyond the H20?
It feels very fluid, like the ground could shift again pretty quickly.
Which, brings us back to that timing question.
Dinner.
The dinner. The fact this potential policy shift surfaces not long after Jensen Huang is at Mar-a-Lago, it does make you pause and wonder.
Coincidence. Or is there maybe some connection there? What does history tell us about these kinds of interactions? Business leaders, political figures, policy decisions?
Well, you can't really just brush it off, can you? It kind of opens up this whole discussion about the relationship between big tech and the Trump administration specifically.
Yeah, this isn't happening in a vacuum. We've seen patterns before, or at least things that look like patterns.
We definitely have.
Uh,
I mean, think back to the inauguration. Reports were that major tech players, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, usual suspects, made pretty significant contributions to the funding.
Right, and there have been ongoing reports, haven't there? Regular meetings between tech CEOs and the former president down at Mar-a-Lago. It suggests, an established channel.
An open door, perhaps.
Yeah.
And it's not just cash or meetings either.
What else?
Well, look at Mark Zuckerberg, appointing Dana White, someone known to be friendly with Trump, to a board position, and reportedly buying a large property near D.C.
Huh. Interesting. It certainly looks like some players are making deliberate moves to, ensure access, maybe influence.
It suggests that, yeah. But what's also fascinating is that even with these apparent connections, big tech wasn't exactly immune initially to the broader trade stuff,
Yeah.
like tariffs.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. The tariffs still hit, didn't they? Even while these meetings and donations were happening.
They did. Apple's the prime example, isn't it? Huge iPhone production, still based in China. Very exposed to those tariffs.
You'd think maybe those connections might have smoothed things over, but manufacturing realities are complex.
Extremely complex. And while Apple's heavily reliant on China, You've got other scenarios, like NVIDIA, we understand, making servers down in Mexico.
Ah, so those specific products wouldn't face the same China tariffs.
Exactly. Different manufacturing location, different tariff implications. It shows how varied the impact is across the sector.
And the general feeling about these tariffs and potential exemptions, it's still just chaos, right?
Pretty much. That analyst quote we saw really nailed it. No company knows what to do at this point whatsoever, just total uncertainty.
Even with talk of like 90-day extensions or whatever, nobody can plan long term.
Precisely. And that uncertainty, it surely affects NVIDIA too, right?
Yeah.
Even if the H20 export situation looks okay for now, future tariff changes or export rule shifts could force them to rethink supply chains all over again.
Which kind of brings us to this whole idea, this perception maybe of a pay-to-play dynamic.
Right. The notion that perhaps financial contributions or building these close business relationships might correlate with getting more favorable policy treatment.
We've heard that phrase used with other industries, like crypto maybe. Now it's cropping up around big tech and this administration.
It points to a particular style, doesn't it? The argument some make is that this administration seems to prefer, or perhaps values more, these direct, face-to-face conversations with CEOs, with political leaders.
Skipping the usual channels maybe.
Possibly. And some might even argue, though it's definitely debatable, that this direct interaction could lead to more accountability. You're talking directly to the decision maker.
And there seems to be a real premium placed on companies announcing, investments in the U.S.
That definitely seems to be part of the equation. That NPR report you mentioned, suggesting NVIDIA might have talked about new investments in AI data centers here in the States as part of these discussions.
It almost feels like a quid pro quo, doesn't it? Show you're investing domestically, and maybe the regulatory path gets a little smoother.
That's certainly one interpretation. It aligns with what seems to be the former president's preference, liking to be around CEOs, being very aware of media coverage, maybe a more transactional view of these relationships.
So for someone listening to this, maybe the key thing to grasp is that this represents a potentially different way government and huge corporations are interacting.
Yeah, maybe less reliant on traditional lobbying firms in K Street, and more about that direct access, those personal connections right at the top.
Okay, so let's try and tie this together then. We've got this specific, quite intriguing development, the potential easing of export rules for NVIDIA's H20 chip.
Right, happening against this background of high-profile, high-stakes engagement between tech leaders and the Trump administration.
And all of this is playing out while there's still massive uncertainty around trade, around tariffs, affecting the whole tech world in complicated ways.
And that possible link, you can't ignore it, between getting that high-level access, like being at that very expensive dinner, and then seeing policy shifts. It really forces you to think.
Yeah, it makes you consider the implications. How are these big decisions actually being made? What factors are truly influencing them behind closed doors?
So given this really complex mix, you've got cutting-edge technology, global geopolitics, big money, corporate influence that leads us, and you, the listener, with a pretty significant question to mull over. What does this whole evolving situation tell us about the future? The future of innovation, sure, but also how international trade might work going forward. And maybe most importantly, what role do individual companies play? How do they navigate or even shape these shifting sands?